we invite you to watch Phoenix Rising Part 2. "We see immense potential, Mr. Blackwood," she'd said, her voice smooth as polished stone. "Your technology, combined with our global reach and capital, could redefine the digital landscape." His mind reeled. This wasn't just about money. It was about reach, about impact. Omnicorp could launch Phoenix Tech's product onto the global stage almost overnight, transforming it from a promising startup into an industry behemoth. The thought was intoxicating, a rapid ascent to the very heights of the tech world he had studied so diligently. He envisioned his algorithms, his creations, shaping the future, truly changing the game. But then, the other side of the coin presented itself. "Of course," the negotiator continued, a subtle shift in her tone, "with an investment of this magnitude, Omnicorp would require a controlling stake, a majority share. You would retain a significant portion, of course, and a seat on the board. But the ultimate direction of Phoenix Tech would be guided by our strategic objectives." A chill snaked down Ethan's spine. A controlling stake. It meant relinquishing his vision, his autonomy, the very essence of what he had built from scratch. Phoenix Tech was more than a company. It was his freedom, his identity, a defiant roar against years of neglect. To sell it, to hand over control, felt like a betrayal of the phoenix that had risen from his own personal ashes. It was a choice that weighed heavily on his soul. The undeniable power of vast resources and rapid expansion, or the fierce, unyielding independence that had fueled his entire journey. The path to global dominance seemed to diverge into two distinct, equally challenging forks, each with its own set of sacrifices. This was a decision that would not just affect his financial future, but the very trajectory of his soul. The quiet hum of the Blackwood Manor, once a symphony of distant wealth, was now punctuated by the low, anxious murmurs of Mr. and Mrs. Blackwood and the increasingly agitated pacing of Jonathan. Eleanor, however, found herself in a different kind of quietude. She was in the family's vast, seldom-used library, a room usually reserved for old, leather-bound classics that no one truly read. She wasn't seeking solace in literature, though. She was simply trying to escape the stifling tension that permeated every corner of Glasswood. Her gaze drifted idly to the polished mahogany table, where a stack of untouched magazines lay. A new issue of Tech Innovator, a prestigious industry magazine her father always subscribed to, sat on top. Her eyes, accustomed to scanning headlines for familiar names and industry trends, casually flickered over its glossy cover. The lead story screamed in bold, triumphant letters, "Phoenix Rising, the unseen genius behind the next tech revolution." And there, beneath the bold headline, was a photograph. Eleanor's breath hitched in her throat. The world around her dissolved into a distant hum. The image was grainy, taken at an angle, perhaps from a crowded event, but there was no mistaking the subject. It was Ethan, her brother, not the shadow of Glasswood, but a young man with an intense gaze, a subtle, almost defiant set to his jaw, standing before a complex digital rendering of what looked like the data compression algorithm she had seen him present at the library. Her hands trembled as she picked up the magazine, the pages rustling like dry leaves. She flipped it open, her eyes darting across the article. Every word was a revelation, a shard of glass piercing her carefully constructed ignorance. It spoke of his quiet brilliance, his groundbreaking work, his refusal to be funded by traditional venture capital in the early stages, his meteoric rise from absolute obscurity. It detailed the core technology, the potential it held to disrupt the market, the buzz it was generating. Ethan Blackwood, the enigmatic founder and CEO of Phoenix Tech, the article read, has taken the industry by storm, operating for years. In stealth mode, Blackwood's revolutionary platform is poised to change the face of data management forever. Sources close to the young CEO describe him as a reclusive genius, fiercely independent and driven by a vision that transcends mere profit. The words blurred before Eleanor's eyes, each one a hammer blow to her conscience. Enigmatic, reclusive, genius, fiercely independent. It was a portrait painted with stark, painful truth. This wasn't the boy who needed two faded shirts. This was a titan in the making, forged in the very fires of neglect that she and her family had inadvertently stoked. The image of him stitching his torn shirt, the memory of his quiet meals in the kitchen, the casual cruelty at the gala, it all rushed back, a tidal wave of agonizing clarity. The contrast was a visceral punch to the gut. While her family's empire crumbled, a new, far more brilliant one had been silently constructed, brick by painful brick, by the very person they had dismissed as insignificant. A profound sense of shock, an icy wave of disbelief washed over her, followed by a burning, suffocating wave of regret. How could she have been so utterly blind? How could they all have been so consumed by their own superficiality, their own perceived importance, that they had allowed such a magnificent talent to wither in the shadows, almost by their own hand? The shame was a bitter taste in her mouth. The article, meant to celebrate a triumph, felt like a devastating indictment of her family's negligence, a mirror reflecting their deepest failures. She clutched the magazine to her chest, her heart pounding with a mixture of awe and a burgeoning, unbearable grief. The secret was out, not just to the world, but to her. And with its unveiling came the crushing weight of a truth too long ignored. The glossy pages of Tech Innovator held not just news of a rising star, but the shattered remnants of Eleanor Blackwood's carefully constructed illusions. The glossy pages of Tech Innovator felt like a leaden weight in Eleanor's hands. The image of Ethan, so vibrant and commanding, a stark contrast to the quiet shadow she knew, pulsed before her eyes. The initial shock had given way to a churning maelstrom of emotions, disbelief, admiration, and a searing, relentless wave of shame. How profoundly had they failed him? How utterly blind had their self-absorption made them? The Blackwood family, connoisseurs of control and meticulous planning, had overlooked a supernova growing silently in their own orbit. She couldn't stay in the library, the very walls seemed to mock her ignorance. She moved through Glasswood Manor, like a somnambulist, each step heavy with the crushing realization. Her mind raced, replaying countless memories: Ethan's threadbare clothes, his solitary meals, the dismissive laughter at the gala, her father's impassive gaze. Every memory, once dismissed as minor, now seemed to scream with a profound, unacknowledged pain. Driven by an instinct she couldn't articulate, a desperate need to understand the depths of his isolation, Eleanor found herself outside Ethan's room. It was a space she rarely entered, a small, unassuming room at the far end of the servants' wing, almost an afterthought in the mansion's sprawling design. It was sparse, devoid of the luxuries afforded to her and her brothers and sister: a single bed, a worn desk, a small bookshelf filled not with leisure reading, but with thick tomes on advanced mathematics and computer science. Her eyes fell on a worn, leather-bound journal tucked away on the desk, half hidden beneath a stack of circuit diagrams. It looked old, its cover scuffed, its pages dog-eared. A strange compulsion drew her to it. It was Ethan's handwriting, a neat, precise script that filled every page. This wasn't just a diary. It was a chronicle of a life lived in silent defiance. Eleanor opened the journal, her fingers trembling. The first entry spoke of childhood loneliness, of quiet observations of his siblings' boisterous lives, of a yearning for connection that was never reciprocated. "They laugh so easily," one entry read, "like birds soaring without a care. I wonder what it feels like to fly." Later pages chronicled his burgeoning fascination with technology, his first tentative steps into coding, the thrill of solving complex problems. He detailed his secret visits to the public library, his encounters with Michael, the clandestine programming competitions. Each line was a brushstroke painting a portrait of a brilliant mind starved for recognition, an artist creating masterpieces in the dark. Then came the entries about Phoenix Tech, the meticulous planning, the sleepless nights, the setbacks, the moments of despair, the unwavering hope that fueled him. He wrote about the profound satisfaction of building something from nothing, of transforming abstract ideas into tangible reality, and woven throughout, like dark threads in a vibrant tapestry, were the poignant reflections on his family. He wrote about the ache of invisibility, the sting of casual dismissal, the yearning for a kind word or a shared meal that never came. He didn't express anger, but a deep, pervasive sorrow, a quiet resignation to his fate within the Blackwood family. "They see right through me," he wrote one entry, "as if I am made of glass. Perhaps I am. Perhaps that is why they never notice the cracks." Eleanor read, tears streaming down her face, blurring the words into a kaleidoscope of pain. Each sentence was a silent accusation, each memory a fresh stab of guilt. The casual indifference, the thoughtless privilege, the utter failure to see the human being beyond the periphery of their perfect lives. The gilded cage had been a torture chamber for his spirit, and they, the unwitting wardens, had never even bothered to check if he was breathing. The realization was a devastating blow, a seismic shift in her understanding of her family and of herself. She saw the vast chasm that separated their glittering existence from his quiet, agonizing reality. The elegance of his code, the ingenuity of Phoenix Tech, was not just genius. It was a defiant act of self-preservation, a monument built on the foundations of neglect. The very next morning, Eleanor, her eyes still red-rimmed from a sleepless night, walked into the Blackwood family breakfast. The scene was typical. Her father, engrossed in the Wall Street Journal, her mother, meticulously arranging flowers, Jonathan on his phone, and Chloe scrolling through social media. The casual normalcy felt grotesque, a thin veneer over the gaping wound in their family. Eleanor placed the worn journal, a silent indictment, in the center of the polished dining table. The thud of leather on wood drew their attention, their gazes shifting from their respective distractions to the unassuming book. "What's this, Eleanor?" Mr. Blackwood asked, a slight frown creasing his brow. "Some new self-help book?" Eleanor ignored him, her voice, usually composed, trembling with a raw edge she didn't try to hide. "This is Ethan's journal, and you are all going to read it. Every single one of you." Her eyes, usually so sharp and direct, were now swimming with unshed tears, but they held a fierce, unyielding resolve. "You will read what we have done, what I have done." A stunned silence fell over the table. Jonathan, for once, lowered his phone, a flicker of confusion in his eyes. Chloe looked up, her bright, innocent gaze clouded with apprehension. Mrs. Blackwood's hand went to her mouth, her eyes wide with a mixture of disbelief and growing fear. Mr. Blackwood picked up the journal, his brow furrowed in annoyance. He began to read, his eyes scanning the early entries, then moving faster, his face slowly draining of color. The casual annoyance morphed into shock, then into a profound, agonizing pain. He saw the echoes of his own dismissal, his own indifference staring back at him from the written page. He saw a son, longing for a father's acknowledgement, a son he had tragically overlooked. Mrs. Blackwood, leaning over his shoulder, read along, a soft gasp escaping her lips as she took in the raw vulnerability of Ethan's words. Her perfectly sculpted composure crumbled, tears welling in her eyes, smudging her mascara. The pain was a physical thing, a crushing weight in her chest. She saw a child she had brought into the world, a child she had ostensibly loved, living in a silent exile under her own roof, desperate for a crumb of the affection she lavished on her other children. The carefully constructed image of the perfect family, the perfect mother, shattered into 1,000 jagged pieces. Jonathan, though initially resistant, snatched the journal from his father's trembling hands. He read, his eyes widening with each passing entry. The snarky comments, the casual dismissals, the laughter at the gala, they replayed in his mind, now drenched in the acid of self-reproach. His usual swagger evaporated, replaced by a deep, burning shame. He saw not a strange, awkward little brother, but a brilliant mind, a sensitive soul, whose pain they had inflicted, unwittingly, systematically. Chloe, peering over Jonathan's shoulder, saw the words and felt a prickle of something she rarely experienced, guilt. The grand house, the lavish gifts, the constant attention she received, it all felt tainted, built on the unseen suffering of her own brother. The realization was a bitter pill. The Blackwoods were consumed by a collective agony of realization. The pristine facade of their perfect family cracked and splintered, revealing the raw, ugly truth beneath. The truth of their neglect, their profound, irreparable indifference. The silence in the dining room was no longer just strained, it was deafening, filled with the unspoken lament of regret and the bitter taste of what might have been. In the aftermath of the journal's revelation, a desperate urgency seized the Blackwood family. They tried to reach Ethan. Text messages, phone calls, emails, a barrage of frantic apologies and explanations, a desperate attempt to bridge the chasm they had created. But Ethan refused. He didn't answer. He didn't respond. His silence was absolute, unyielding. He had moved out of Glasswood Manor that very morning, before Eleanor had even found his journal, leaving no note, no forwarding address. He had simply disappeared, taking only his most essential belongings and the quiet, strength he had forged in solitude. His new office, a rented, unassuming space in a bustling downtown building, became his sanctuary, far removed from the suffocating grandeur of his past. He knew they were trying to reach him. He saw the missed calls, the glowing notifications, on his phone. But the idea of returning, of facing their belated contrition, felt like a cruel mockery. The wounds were too deep, the scars too numerous. They weren't just skin deep, they were etched into his very soul. He had built his own world, his own empire, far from their reach, without their help, without their acknowledgement. The phoenix had indeed risen, but it had risen alone, its wings forged in the fires of their neglect. And now, as they sought to mend the shattered remnants of their family, Ethan, the silent architect of his own destiny, chose to remain in the liberating silence of his newfound independence. The chasm they had created had become too wide, too deep to bridge, at least not yet. The pain of the past was a barrier, an invisible wall that protected him from the very people who now desperately sought to pull him back into their orbit. Thutur Ares, Blackwood family, once a fortress of unassailable prestige, found themselves adrift in a turbulent sea of regret. The shocking revelation of Ethan's journal had torn through the fabric of their carefully constructed reality, leaving behind a gaping wound that bled guilt and recrimination. Mr. and Mrs. Blackwood, their faces etched with newfound lines of worry and sorrow, were shadows of their former selves. The weight of their neglect, a burden heavier than any financial crisis, pressed down on them. Eleanor, her initial shock now transmuted into a fierce, unwavering resolve, was the first to act. She had lived with the uncomfortable truth for longer than anyone else, having witnessed Ethan's quiet brilliance firsthand. Now, armed with the undeniable evidence of his pain and his triumph, she became the family's conscience, relentlessly pushing them to confront the chasm they had created. Their attempts to reach Ethan were a barrage of desperate pleas, digital apologies that landed in the void of his determined silence. Each unreturned call, each unanswered message, was another thorn in their already raw hearts. They tried everything, from heartfelt emails to desperate voicemails, but Ethan remained, an unyielding wall of silence. His absence from Glasswood Manor, once a casual given, now felt like a gaping wound, a constant reminder of their unforgivable oversight. Finally, driven by a desperate need for absolution, they decided to physically seek him out. Eleanor, clutching a small, elegantly wrapped gift, a silent, futile offering, led the way. They found Phoenix Tech's offices in a surprisingly unassuming building downtown, far from the gleaming towers of Silicon Valley or the ostentatious luxury of Hollywood Hills. It was a stark contrast to Blackwood innovations, a testament to Ethan's understated rise. The receptionist, a sharp-eyed young woman who looked barely older than Ethan, regarded them with a polite but firm skepticism. "Do you have an appointment?" she asked, her voice betraying not a hint of awe at the formidable Blackwood name. "Mr. Blackwood, usually imperious, swallowed his pride. "We are his family. We need to speak with him. It's urgent." His voice, usually so commanding, was laced with an uncharacteristic plea. A moment later, Ethan emerged from an inner office, a faint frown on his face. He looked different, older perhaps, more formidable. The quiet boy was gone, replaced by a confident, albeit still reserved, CEO. His eyes, when they met theirs, held no warmth, no hint of the familial affection they so desperately craved. There was only a cool, professional politeness, like a pane of frosted glass. Mother, father, Eleanor, Jonathan, Chloe, he greeted, his voice even, devoid of emotion, a stark contrast to the tumultuous emotions warring within their own chests. It was a formal acknowledgment, not a heartfelt welcome. "To what do I owe this unexpected visit?" Mrs. Blackwood stepped forward, her hands clasped together, her eyes brimming with tears. "Ethan, my boy, we're so sorry. So terribly, terribly sorry. We read your journal. We had no idea. Please, forgive us." Her voice cracked, tears streaming down her face. Mr. Blackwood, usually so composed, looked utterly broken. "Son," he began, his voice raspy with emotion, "we failed you. Terribly. We were blind, preoccupied. It's no excuse, but we want to make it right. We want to be a family again." Eleanor, her own eyes glistening, stepped closer. "Ethan, I saw you at the library. I saw what you're capable of. You are extraordinary. We were so wrong. Please let us try to mend this. Let me." Her voice was a raw plea, stripped of her usual poise. Jonathan, uncharacteristically subdued, managed. A hesitant, "Yeah, Ethan, we really messed up. I'm sorry for everything, for being an ass." Even Chloe, for once, looked genuinely contrite, her usual effervescence replaced by a quiet, tearful gaze. Ethan listened, his face a mask of polite indifference. He watched their tears, their pleas, their belated remorse, and a cold, bitter residue coated his tongue. It wasn't anger that burned within him, not anymore. It was a hollow ache, a profound sense of too late. "Apologies are noted," Ethan finally said, his voice flat, his gaze sweeping over each of them. "But they don't erase years of silence, years of being a ghost in your own home, years of being dismissed, overlooked, ignored." His voice gained a subtle edge, though it remained calm. "I built Phoenix Tech not with your support, but despite your indifference. I built it from nothing, with the help of those who actually saw me." He paused, his eyes holding Eleanor's for a fleeting moment, a silent acknowledgment of her hidden awareness. "I have stood on my own 2 feet. I have created something meaningful. I don't need your recognition or your belated affection to validate my existence. It's too late to build a bridge across a chasm that was allowed to widen for so long. The damage is done. The scars are permanent." His words, delivered with quiet conviction, were like icy daggers to their hearts. The pleas died on their lips, replaced by a stunned silence. His polite refusal was more devastating than any angry outburst. He had truly moved on, a phoenix soaring beyond the reach of their past mistakes. As the Blackwoods retreated from Phoenix Tech's offices, their hearts heavy with the weight of Ethan's unyielding resolve, the crisis at Blackwood Innovations deepened into a full-blown catastrophe. The market, unforgiving in its assessment, continued to punish their missteps. Shares plummeted. Investor confidence evaporated like dew in the morning sun, and the once impregnable fortress of their empire began to crumble from within. The final blow came swiftly, brutally. A major institutional investor, a cornerstone of Blackwood's financial stability for decades, abruptly pulled out their massive capital. The news hit Mr. Blackwood like a physical blow. He stumbled out of his office, his face ashen, his body trembling. The company was in freefall, spiraling towards an inevitable abyss. We're done," he choked out, his voice a hoarse whisper as he stumbled into the family living room, where Eleanor and Mrs. Blackwood sat in a grim vigil. They pulled out. "All of it. We can't cover the debt. We have no liquidity. Blackwood Innovations is finished." Mrs. Blackwood gasped, her hand flying to her mouth, tears springing to her eyes. Eleanor felt a cold, crushing dread settle in her stomach. The dream, the legacy, the very foundation of their lives was dissolving into nothingness. The gilded cage was not just rusting, it was collapsing. In a tense emergency family meeting, the somber atmosphere hung heavy, thick with desperation. Jonathan, stripped of his usual bravado, stared blankly at the polished table. Chloe, for the first time in her life, looked truly terrified, her pampered world crumbling around her. Mr. Blackwood, his face a mask of profound despair, leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his head in his hands. His voice was a raw, guttural sound, stripped of all authority. "There's only one way out, one desperate chance. There's a new government contract, a massive one. It's a complete overhaul of the national digital infrastructure, billions of dollars. If we can secure that contract, if we can prove we still have the capacity, the innovation, we might just pull ourselves back from the brink." He lifted, his head, his eyes, haunted and desperate, scanning his family's faces. "But it's a long shot. And the competition, it's fierce. The strongest contender, the one with the most innovative solution, the one that's been making waves in the industry, is Phoenix Tech." The words hung in the air, a cruel, ironic twist of fate, a brutal mockery of their past. Phoenix Tech, Ethan's company. The empire forged in the fires of their neglect was now their only hope for survival. The bitter taste of realization filled their mouths. The very son they had cast aside, the one whose pain they had just been forced to confront, was now their only salvation, their unexpected adversary in the battle for their family's very existence. The universe, it seemed, had a twisted sense of poetic justice. The air in Glasswood Manor was thick with the scent of desperation and the lingering ghosts of a crumbling empire. Blackwood Innovations, once a colossus, was now a sinking ship, its crew scrambling for any floating debris. The revelation that their only lifeline, the massive government contract, was a prize also coveted by Phoenix Tech, Ethan's company, was a twist of fate too cruel to be mere coincidence. It was a cosmic jest, a brutal mirror reflecting their past indifference. There was no other choice. Stripped of their pride, their arrogance, and their seemingly boundless wealth, the Blackwood family, for the first time, found themselves truly vulnerable, truly humble. They had to face Ethan again. The meeting was arranged through Michael, who relayed Ethan's terse agreement to hear them out. The tension in Phoenix Tech's modest conference room was palpable, a suffocating blanket woven from regret and fractured hope. Mr. and Mrs. Blackwood sat across from Ethan, their faces etched with the stark lines of despair. Their former imperiousness had evaporated, replaced by an almost heartbreaking vulnerability. "Ethan," Mr. Blackwood began, his voice a hoarse whisper, "Son, we are at the end. Blackwood Innovations is on the verge of collapse. Everything we've built, everything your grandparents built, it's all going to be gone." His eyes, usually sharp and calculating, were now clouded with a desperate plea, a raw, naked fear that Ethan had never seen before. "We failed you, unequivocally. There are no excuses, but now we are asking for your help to save the company, save our legacy, save our family." Mrs. Blackwood, usually so composed, reached across the table, her hand trembling as she clasped Ethan's. "Please, Ethan," she implored, her voice thick with tears, "don't let us lose everything. We know we hurt you, deeply. But we love you. We always have, even when we were too blind to show it. Give us a chance to make amends. Give us a chance to be the family you deserved." Her words were a torrent of raw emotion, a dam finally breaking after years of suppressed grief. Eleanor, her face pale but resolute, leaned forward. "Ethan, I know words might mean nothing, but I saw your brilliance. I read your journal. I understand now the depth of your pain, and I am so profoundly sorry for my part in it. I want to help, truly. Not just the company, but to fix us." Her gaze was direct, her sincerity a fragile bridge across the chasm of their past. She wasn't just asking for Blackwood innovations, she was asking for a sliver of the brother she had finally begun to see. Jonathan, stripped of his usual swagger, simply nodded, his eyes downcast. "We were fools, Ethan. Blind, arrogant fools. I'm truly sorry, little brother." Chloe, quiet and tearful, managed a small, almost imperceptible nod, her eyes wide with a fear that finally transcended her privileged bubble. Ethan listened to their pleas, their apologies, their desperate attempts at reconciliation. His heart, a fortress built against years of emotional siege, felt the first tremor of a crack. He remembered the cold nights, the solitary meals, the dismissive laughter. The wounds were still there, aching beneath the surface, like old battle, scars that throbbed with every change in the emotional weather. The desire for retribution, for the cold satisfaction of watching their empire crumble, was a powerful, seductive whisper in his ear. He could walk away. He could let them fall. It would be a poetic justice, a bitter taste of their own medicine. But then, another set of memories flickered through his mind. The fleeting moments of genuine warmth from Eleanor, however rare, the quiet pride he once held for his father's achievements, even if those achievements overshadowed him. The almost primal yearning for a familial bond that, despite everything, still resided deep within his very core. He saw his mother's raw pain, his father's utter brokenness. He saw the genuine remorse in Eleanor's eyes, a reflection of his own hidden potential. The phoenix that had risen from the ashes of his personal suffering had done so not out of vengeance, but out of a relentless drive to create, to thrive, to prove his own worth. To let them utterly collapse, to revel in their ruin, felt antithetical to the very spirit of that rebirth. Could a true phoenix rise by merely destroying what came before, or by illuminating a path forward? He spent a long, agonizing night in his quiet office, the city lights twinkling outside like distant, indifferent stars. He walked the fine line between justice and mercy, between the profound satisfaction of personal vindication and the complex, messy landscape of forgiveness. Michael, sensing the gravity of the decision, stayed with him, offering quiet support but no advice. "It's your call, man," he'd said simply. "Your future, your family, whatever you decide, I'm with you." The next morning, Ethan stood before his family once more, his expression unreadable. The silence was thick, pregnant with anticipation. "I will help you," Ethan finally stated, his voice clear, calm, and unwavering. A collective gasp of relief, a fragile wave of hope, washed over. "And the Blackwoods." Mr. Blackwood slumped back in his chair, tears of gratitude welling in his eyes. Mrs. Blackwood clasped her hands over her heart, a silent prayer of thanks. "But not as a rescue and not without conditions," Ethan continued, his voice gaining a subtle edge of steel. "Phoenix Tech will invest in Blackwood innovations. We will provide the capital and our technology to secure this government contract and rebuild the company. However, this will be a true partnership, not a bailout." His eyes met his father's, then Eleanor's. "Phoenix Tech will take a significant, controlling stake in the revitalized Blackwood innovations. I will have a substantial say in its future direction, and fundamental changes will be implemented. This isn't about simply patching old leaks. It's about building a new, sustainable foundation, and it will ensure a fair and equitable future for all involved, not just a select few." His gaze briefly, meaningfully swept over Jonathan and Chloe. The terms were harsh, a bitter pill for Mr. and Mrs. Blackwood to swallow, a relinquishing of the absolute control they had wielded for decades. But faced with utter ruin, they knew there was no other choice. They nodded, their faces etched with a complex mixture of relief and humbled acceptance. Eleanor, however, felt a surge of respect. This was a true leader, not just a brilliant mind. This was a man who understood leverage, who understood the value of his own worth, and who was determined to ensure justice, not just survival. The collaborative effort between Phoenix Tech and the newly restructured Blackwood Innovations was a testament to Ethan's quiet genius and Eleanor's unexpected acumen. Under Ethan's strategic guidance and the unparalleled capabilities of Phoenix Tech's revolutionary data compression platform, Blackwood Innovations' bid for the government contract was nothing short of brilliant. They won decisively against all odds, their combined strength a force no competitor could match. The success was monumental. Blackwood Innovations, once on the brink of oblivion, was not merely revived. It was reborn, stronger, more agile, and more innovative than ever before. Under Ethan's visionary leadership, with Eleanor by his side as a capable and increasingly trusted partner, the company quickly diversified, embracing new technologies and ethical business practices that echoed Phoenix Tech's core values. Eleanor, learning rapidly from Ethan's quiet efficiency and deep understanding of the tech landscape, shed her old skin of superficial leadership, evolving into a sharp, strategic mind who commanded respect. She became his bridge to the corporate world, softening the edges of his fierce independence when needed, while he honed her raw talent for true innovation. The relationship within the Blackwood family, though scarred, slowly began to mend. The initial bitterness lingered, a ghost in the corners of their interactions, but it was gradually replaced by a fragile, tentative understanding. Ethan still carried the deep wounds of his past neglect, the pain etched into his very being, but he was learning to forgive, to accept that true healing wasn't about forgetting, but about choosing not to let the past define his present. He still preferred his quiet solitude, but now his family respected it. Mr. and Mrs. Blackwood, humbled by their near catastrophe, dedicated themselves to making amends. They spent more time with Ethan, seeking to understand his world, listening with genuine interest, trying to bridge the years of silence with quiet conversations and shared experiences. They made small, consistent efforts to show their love and respect, learning, finally, to see him not as a shadow, but as the extraordinary son he had always been. Jonathan, having witnessed the true meaning of power and the consequences of superficiality, matured dramatically. He shed his party boy persona, investing himself in the revitalized Blackwood, genuinely seeking to learn from Ethan. Chloe, too, grew up. The spoiled princess began to volunteer, to engage with the world beyond her lavish bubble, slowly shedding her self-absorption. She learned belatedly the true value of empathy and family. Ethan, the Phoenix reborn, had not only saved his family's legacy but had also ignited a new light in their fractured relationships. Glasswood Manor, though still a symbol of wealth, was no longer a gilded cage. It became a home, imperfect and scarred, but finally, genuinely connected. The Blackwood family, unable to erase the past, had instead learned its most profound lessons: the true value of love, the quiet power of presence, and the immeasurable worth of a family, no matter how broken, striving to find its way back to the light. The journey was long, the healing ongoing, but for the first time, a true, hopeful dawn broke over the Hollywood hills. Years had passed since the dramatic resurgence of Blackwood Innovations, a phoenix-like transformation orchestrated by the very son they had once cast aside. Glasswood Manor, once a monument to their isolated grandeur, now hummed with a different kind of energy. It wasn't the frenetic pace of ambition or the brittle tension of impending doom, but a softer, more resonant hum of connection, of a family tentatively, painstakingly rebuilding. Ethan, now the undisputed CEO of both Phoenix Tech and the revitalized Blackwood Innovations, moved through the world with a quiet authority that commanded respect. The raw, open wounds from his past had formed scars, intricate patterns on his soul, but they no longer bled. They were reminders of resilience, of a strength forged in the crucible of neglect. His initial reserve, once a shield, had softened into a contemplative quietude. He still valued solitude, finding his deepest moments of clarity and creativity in the hushed embrace of his own thoughts, but he no longer feared connection. His eyes, though still holding a trace of that indefinable sorrow, now also held a steady, knowing warmth, a reflection of the hard-won peace he had found. The decision to save Blackwood, to offer mercy instead of retribution, had been the crucible of his final transformation, proving that true power lay not in destruction, but in judicious creation and the audacious act of forgiveness. Eleanor, his closest confidant and now the dynamic COO of the unified entity, had blossomed under his influence. Her sharp intellect, once channeled into maintaining a flawless facade, was now fully unleashed on the complexities of a global tech empire. She had traded her meticulously planned social calendar for late-night strategy sessions, her designer, gowns for comfortable practical attire that spoke of purpose. The shame of their past indifference fueled her dedication, transforming her into a fierce advocate for ethical innovation and a surprising voice of empathy within the corporate world. She wasn't just a leader. She was a bridge, translating Ethan's often abstract genius into tangible strategies, and more importantly, a loyal sister who had finally seen. Her relationship with Ethan was the most profound change. It was a partnership built on mutual respect and a silent understanding that transcended words. Jonathan, too, had undergone a significant metamorphosis. The flamboyant party boy had receded, replaced by a grounded, hard-working executive. He had embraced his role within the company, learning the intricacies of its operations with a surprising dedication. The frivolous pursuits had been replaced by a genuine interest in the business, a desire to contribute meaningfully. He still enjoyed a good time, but his laughter was no longer brittle or mocking. It was genuine, often directed at himself. His interactions with Ethan were now marked by a humble respect, a silent acknowledgement of his younger brother's superior intellect and moral compass. He often sought Ethan's advice, not just on business matters but on life, a quiet acknowledgement of his brother's wisdom. Chloe, the pampered princess, had shed her golden chains of privilege. The Ocean View property, once a symbol of her boundless indulgence, had been quietly repurposed, a portion of its profits donated to a foundation supporting underprivileged youth in tech education, an initiative she had passionately spearheaded. Her social media feed, once a parade of lavish self-portraits, now featured stories of empowerment and community engagement. She found purpose in giving back, realizing that true happiness lay not in acquisition, but in contribution. Her interactions with Ethan, though still somewhat shy, held a newfound admiration and genuine affection. Mr. and Mrs. Blackwood, no longer the titans they once were, found a different kind of fulfillment. They had stepped back from the daily operations, their hands now guiding the philanthropic arm of the company, focusing on education and community outreach. The frantic pace of their former lives had given way to a quieter, more reflective existence. They spent more time at Glasswood not just as owners but as inhabitants, truly living within its walls. Their conversations with Ethan were now long, heartfelt, filled with the earnest desire to understand, to listen. They learned to savor the simple moments, a shared cup of coffee, a quiet walk through the gardens, the comfortable silence that now felt like acceptance rather than neglect. The weight of their past mistakes would always be with them, a quiet sorrow, but it was now tempered by the warmth of Ethan's hard-won forgiveness, a constant reminder of the precious, fragile nature of family. The final culmination of Blackwood Innovation's revival came with the launch of Nexus, the integrated digital infrastructure project for the government. It was a resounding success, a testament to the seamless fusion of Blackwood's established infrastructure and Phoenix Tech's revolutionary AI and data compression. The project didn't just meet expectations, it surpassed them, setting a new global standard for digital connectivity. At the grand unveiling ceremony, held not in a lavish hotel ballroom, but in a state-of-the-art tech hub that symbolized their new direction, Ethan stood on stage, no longer a phantom, but a visionary. He spoke with a calm, articulate voice, devoid of grandiosity, yet imbued with an undeniable power. He spoke of innovation, of progress, but also of the profound responsibility that came with shaping the future. He spoke of the importance of human connection in an increasingly digital world, a quiet nod to his own journey. As he concluded, the applause was deafening, a roaring wave of admiration for the young man who had not only saved an empire, but had redefined it. Later, in a quieter moment, gathered in the newly renovated, more welcoming living room at Glasswood, the family shared a meal. It wasn't the stiff formal dinners of old. It was a relaxed affair, filled with genuine conversation, laughter, and an unspoken understanding. Ethan, for the first time in years, truly belonged. He wasn't the silent shadow, he was the quiet anchor, the steady flame that now warmed their once cold hearth. The wounds of the past were not forgotten, but they were acknowledged, understood, and slowly, surely, healing. The Blackwood family, once defined by its power and its flaws, was now defined by its resilience, its capacity for change, and its enduring, if imperfect, love. The phoenix had not only risen from its own ashes, it had brought its fractured family with it into the dawn of a new, brighter chapter. Comment from the author. Thank you for joining me on the journey of Phoenix Rising. This story is a testament to the quiet power of resilience, the transformative nature of forgiveness, and the enduring, complex bonds of family. It reminds us that genius can flourish in the unlikeliest of places, and that true strength often lies not in what we possess, but in our capacity to overcome adversity and extend grace. May it inspire you to look closer at those around you, to see the unseen, and to remember that even from the deepest ashes, a phoenix can rise, bringing light not just to itself, but to those it touches. If you enjoyed this story, please consider liking this post and subscribing to my channel for more narratives that aim to stir the heart and spark the mind. Your support helps bring more stories to life. Thank you.